Hello and welcome to Twilight Render. This is Fletch. Today we're going to discuss post-processing. Post-processing is how to adjust the exposure and the general look of an image after it's been rendered. You can also do post-processing during the rendering, but in this case I have the image opened in the render history. So click on Denoise Render if you have the plugin for Twilight. It's called FastForward. It'll denoise your image for you. This image was rendered with EZ09. If you have a NVIDIA card with CUDA, you can use our FastForward denoise rendering. It works amazingly well. If you have an Intel processor, denoise is also going to work with the Intel processor. So here we have opened our EZ09 rendered image inside the render history. This is available to pro users only, but the post-processing is going to be on the bottom right-hand corner in the normal render dialog. Let's open that up. So you'll find it right here, post-processing. You click this to open it. So let's open the post-processing by clicking on this button here, and we can see that we have these different algorithms available to us. We have recently updated all these algorithms in Twilight Render, so if you haven't downloaded the latest version, be sure you've done so. And even the simple and linear have been improved. So let's choose simple, and your exposure and your gamma are going to be your main two controls for all these algorithms. If you increase exposure, depending on how the algorithm is designed, the lighter part of your image should get brighter without lifting the darks too much. The darkest part of your image may not be lifted very much. If you use the linear post-processing, you can change the darks by coming in here. I suggest when you are playing with these algorithms, when you're playing with these numbers, try doubling and halving the numbers. So if you wanted to see what this does, maybe cut it in half or double it to see how that affects. You see how the glass on these lamps changed drastically when I cut that in half. Remember that even when I'm in linear, the exposure and gamma will affect the image. Maybe when you're working with linear, you might want to leave exposure and gamma set to 1. And then work with the darks and lights. So I might increase my dark to maybe get some detail back off the floor. And I may increase the light to maybe brighten up these lights, but you can see I'm already starting to lose some detail on the face here. So let's go, what if I increase it to 1.5? Okay, so then I'm wanting to get these details back. And so I might use the highlight compression and double it to see if I can get some of the details back. You can see some of the details have come back on this. But I'm not sure how much. Yeah, here we go. Now we can see that the face details have come back. So you can use the dark, you can use the light, you can use the compression to try to balance all of these different aspects of your image. What I wanted to show you today most of all is the ACES and Filmic. ACES is kind of an automatic Filmic. So if we choose ACES, you might find that it's quickly becomes one of your favorite algorithms to use. It automatically sort of pops the image. It looks nice. Now, if the image in this case looks a little oversaturated, you can desaturate by lifting up the gamma. It will also brighten the image up a little bit. Find that just lifting the gamma a little bit when my ACES gives me too much saturation sort of solves a lot of problems. And here I've got the highlight compression set to 5. I should set that back to the default or just disable it. Here I can still see that her nose and her eyes are there. And the exposure is still set to 1 in this case. But each lighting condition, each rendering may be different. So, but I just want to show you an overview of how these different settings work, how I work with them, how I adjust them, and give you a starting point on what you can accomplish. So if I have exposure at 2, gamma set to 1, and I'm going to increase this highlight compression because I've lost all the detail on this statue here. It's looking very nice, except that these lamps seem sort of flat. So you can see by doubling the exposure, the detail in the lamp and the color of those lamps is greatly affected. So in this case, I might just want to lift up the gamma a little bit. Now, I'm liking this in the middle, but I would like to kind of take away some of the brightness around the edges here. And what you can do is use Vignette. And then your hotspot is the percentage of the center of the image. So if it's set to 1, that is from the center of the image out to the edge, that's your hotspot. And if you set the alpha to 1, you're increasing the density of the dark edges, or whichever color you've chosen here. This could be white. So here it really pops it to see what's happening here. So hotspot defaults at 0.2. So this gives you no effect in this little area here. And maybe if we set it to 50%. All right. And then if we set alpha to 50%, you can see what happens there. So if we switch back to black, there we go. Actually, what's nice is just showing how these effects are really affecting things. Put this back to 1 and change fall off to 1. So you can see that it's really thick. And if I change the fall off to 0.1, it's going to be a really sharp spotlight. Okay, so 1.5 basically means like the width of the image plus another half of the image is going to be the fall off, the fade. So it's going from solid to faded out. And if we switch it back to black now, understanding all of that, we can see that this vignette really pops the center of that image out. Now I can lift this, but the vignette keeps these edges dark. All right. So let's try a little bit boost of exposure and see what happens here. And remember, we have highlight compression on, so there we go. So we've talked about vignette and the aces, and we talked about simple and linear. Just to be clear, the simple, if we have default set to 1 and 1 here, simple is your basic. You increase the exposure and it increases your brights, but it is not very sophisticated, and you can see you lose a lot of detail quickly. So maybe move in increments of 0.1, which if you just use the arrows here, it'll move up and down in those increments. Now, I said the aces is sort of an automatic Filmic, but we can use Filmic. And Filmic works in a similar way. Your exposure set to 1, gamma set to 1. Filmic versus aces. There's very little difference. You can see aces maybe a little bit darker. But each of these is working in a percentage. So if you imagine that each pixel is 0 as black and 1 is pure white, then what you're saying in the highlights here, that anything above 85% brightness is going to be considered in the highlight range. Anything above 50% is going to be the mid-range, and anything above 10% is shadows, or below 10% is shadows. So if you want to push the mid-range up or down towards the shadow or towards the highlights, then you would boost that. lifting it up just a little bit like this. I suggest you leave white point just as it is, as default, and I usually tune the mid-range, or I might adjust the highlights. But generally, I find that I really like the way Aces works, so I will typically just choose Aces and work with my exposure and my gamma to do what I want to do. Typically find myself maybe boosting gamma just a slight bit, when Aces seems to maybe push my darks too dark. If you like to see a little bit of a glowing effect on your brightest points, you can use Bloom. You can see that Bloom has affected all the brightest areas, but it leaves the other areas a little bit alone. I'm going to turn it off. And watch in the brick area here, it will boost them just a little bit in brightness, but it mostly affects most strongly the brightest areas. So sharpness, brightness, and size are your three options. So if we were to jump this up 10 times to brightness, it works to really push everything to pure white. Let's put that back down and let's see what sharpness does. Sharpness at 1. Let's put the brightness at 5 so we can see what the sharpness is doing. See that it starts to affect. Sharpness actually seems to be affecting where this bloom will be applied on which pixels. And it seems like it's affecting any pixel that is above 20% brightness. So if we were to put it at 0.75, that should affect only the pixels that are above 0.75 brightness if 0 is black and 1 is pure white in the scene. And the brightness is the multiplier that it's applying to those pixels. And the size should be the distance that it blurs out. Yeah, so now the blurring size effect is 20%, so that's the edge glow. So if we change the brightness back to 0.5, that's given a little bit more soft glow effect. And I'm sure that brightness is still way too strong. So let's lower it way down. And we'll maybe even increase the sharpness to 0.8. So now we're getting a very subtle bloom. If I turn this off, there you can see it with off. Here it is applied. It's very subtle. There's your glow. Okay, so bloom takes a while to calculate, even though you might have a good computer graphics card, but it seems that bloom is really a complex algorithm, searching through every pixel, seeing which one needs to have this glowing effect added or not. So keep that in mind. You got to be patient with it as it works, and I typically don't use bloom, but when I do, it's only after the rendering is complete. I try not to use it while it's in the middle of rendering. If you combine Vignette and Bloom, there's a strong glowing effect, and this dark edge, it really pops this. I mean, obviously this is a little too much over the top, but I think you get the idea. And finally, let's go back to Let's do simple. Let's put it at 1 and 1. And then if we do temperature adjustments, so the lower the desired temperature, the warmer the image. So if I were to put this at 2000, it'll turn everything very, very orange. So if it starts at 6500 and I want this whole image to warm up just a little bit, I'll lower this temperature. And if I put it at 6000, it gives a little bit of a warmer feel to the space. And the reason this temperature adjustment is here is I usually use it only on exteriors, and I usually use about 6300 just to give a little bit of a warmer feel. Let's disable this. It's a very subtle thing, but on exteriors, it's very powerful. So if you're doing an exterior and there's a little bit of a blue cast that's coming from the global illumination and the blue sky, from the blue physical sky, use this temperature adjustment to try to compensate for that blue cast. This will warm up the image a little bit. But be careful with this on interiors, because here you can see at 5400, if I disable this, see the space, and then if you turn the temperature adjustment on, you can see that it really turns each of the materials will get that warm cast to them. So if you care very much about your material colors, go very easy on the temperature adjustment. Keep it subtle. When you go to save your files, I suggest saving them as PNG files because there is no loss there. But if you save it in JPEG format, you may see some small coloration artifacts. Very well. So finally, I'd like to say that I really like ACEs, and I might generally add a little bit of exposure, and I may add a little bit of this gamma to lighten the whole space up. But in general, I find that ACEs give some beautiful results and with no fuss. I hope that has helped you today, and if you have any questions, please be sure to join the community. Ask any question you like on the forum. And until next time, I will see you on the forums.